Dirty Bird podcast contains foul language and is not appropriate for young fledglings. Listener discretion is advised. Our intro music is brought to you by Ricky Pistone, aka Dick Piston. And our outro music is brought to you by the Sidewalk Slammers. Check them out wherever you get your music.
Are you looking for a podcast today with ornithology and humor you crave? Well, I know all these guys and it's birds they like. It's Dirty Bird, yeah, they're just a couple guys who really like birds. It's Dirty Bird, yeah, they're pretty dirty, but they really like birds.
Hello, and welcome to Dirty Bird Podcast, a podcast that's serious about birds, but nothing else. I'm Dr. John, and in each episode, I pick an individual bird species and tell you everything you need to know about it. I usually record outside, but today, the winds of November came early to Buckhannon, and we had our first snow already, and there's been a bunch of freezing rain. So today, I'm actually recording at Volume Bookstore in Buckhannon, West Virginia. I got Spike as a producer in here. This is some fancy stuff going on with Dirty Bird Podcast. There's a mixing table. Like, oh man, it's so it probably sounds way better than when I'm just sitting in the woods with my microphone. There will be no bird noises, unfortunately, unless Spike decides to tweet or something in the background. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll probably be doing some more recordings in here on rainy days and during the winter, especially if you have a hard winter here. But I'm excited today to talk about the European Starling. But before I get started on that, I want to do this episode's bird watch. This one comes from Cass. He's a good friend of the show. He's been on an episode in the past. Check it out. And he sends this bird watch from Puerto Rico.
Hi, Dr. John. It's Cass. I just wanted to send in a quick birding story about my trip in Puerto Rico. I had a work trip out there, and I had very little time to actually go birding, but I had a few species I really wanted to see. I really wanted to see the green toady, of course, and I really wanted to see the Puerto Rican spindalis, which is, I believe it's the national bird of Puerto Rico. But actually, I asked three different people while I was there, and I got completely different answers about the national bird of Puerto Rico. One lady said that it was a parrot. This website I read said it was a green toady, which I'm pretty sure it isn't, but I think it's just quite famous and it's hard, not common. So, but the Puerto Rican spindalis is what I think is as the official bird of Puerto Rico. You might be able to correct me on that. But yeah, I've never been to Puerto Rico and was excited to see the new birds. Saw some great pelagic birds, but really only had one day where I could go into the rainforest after the job was over. So basically I just went in and I walked so that I could see more birds. And I saw first the banana quit, which is super common out there. It's basically like a starling in the States, so many banana quits. And I was really excited to see it at first. And then you know how it is when you ID something and then you're hoping to see more variety, and then you just keep seeing song sparrows or whatever it is. After a while, you start getting annoyed, which I try not to do. I try to still be pleased to see every bird I see, but after a while, it was like these damn banana quits. That's all I see. I saw 400 banana quits some birds, and had basically walked most of the park, and I really only ID'd bananaquits and a couple parakeets. And so then I went up this trail to a waterfall, and I was about 3-4 miles up this waterfall. I just kept kind of going up to the rainforest, deeper and deeper up. And at one point, I actually kind of slid down this mud embankment and grabbed a tree to rest my fall. And the tree was covered in all these black thorns. It went into my hand, and it hurt so bad. And I tried to pull them out, couldn't really get them all out. And then just the jungle, dense, it's super dense jungle with like all sorts of crazy plants that I'd never seen before, and difficult fronds to work through, just a total tangle of bushes, everything's soaking wet, and it was really hard to keep your knockers dry when it's that wet, so I was constantly wiping them down, and then finally I was on this hill just covered with shrubbery, and I heard the song of the Puerto Rican Starlings, and crept through the jungle. It's actually really easy to creep through quietly because everything's so wet. It's like really hard to actually sneak up on a bird when everything's dry and crunchy, but rainforest is so wet that it was pretty easy to do, and just peered through this foliage, and there's this little tiny bird. It's so pretty. It just like has this bright tangerine collar on it, and the black and white stripes on the head, and it's just sitting on a little branch, just bobbing up and down, and maybe eating like a berry or something. And so yeah, I got to see it. Look through my binos at it for only like 20-30 seconds, but really wonderful. Pretty worth it in the end. Yeah, when I flew back in New York, I stopped at a little shop to get something to pull out the rest of the thorns from my hand, because I couldn't get the thorns out of my hand. And before that, because I didn't have tweezers or like a pin or anything, and ended up using just like a little pin that would have the Statue of Liberty on it, like one of those like buttons with a clothespin on the back. So I'm just sitting in security doing like surgery on my hand to pull out like little thorns. Lady Liberty causing me more pain in the year 2025. So, but yeah, totally worth it. That was it. That's my story. Bye.
Thanks, Cass. Yeah, got to keep those knockers dry. As I know, anytime you go out birding in the rain, just constantly wiping at those binoculars lenses. By the way, it doesn't appear Puerto Rico has an official bird. Meaning there's no like legislation that's been passed naming an official bird. But the Spindalis is the unofficial national bird of Puerto Rico, since it's found nowhere else but Puerto Rico. It really is a gorgeous bird, as you described, Cass. The colloquial name for it in Puerto Rico is the Reina Mora, or the Moorish Queen. It's such a cool name, Moorish Queen. It sounds like a Game of Thrones character. I love it. Yunque National Park is definitely on my bucket list. My wife and I are trying to go to all the national parks. And we're also taking Baby Bo to national parks. He's up to 3 now, so definitely going to make it there sometime, and hopefully I see the Moorish Queen also. But listeners, send your bird watches so I can play them on the show and answer some bird questions, or just tell me about your birding experiences. We all love to hear about them here. Speaking about Dirty Bird love, I have a new review on Apple Podcast. This one comes from, the name is just Chess, and it says, haven't listened to a second of this podcast, but I just played the host in online chess randomly. His username is Dirty Bird Podcast. I looked it up, and here we are. Yes, I do play online chess under the handle for my podcast. I do remember playing this guy, and by the way, I kicked his ass. But y'all leave me reviews wherever you're, listening to the podcast. Helps people find the show and makes me happy. Shout out to Adrian for suggesting this episode on European Starlings. Fuck Starlings, by the way. We'll see. By the end of the episode, I might have changed my opinion. But man, I know all my U.S., Canadian, maybe some Mexico listeners too, and South America, as we'll talk about, and Australia, like all over the world where this bird is invasive. A lot of birders, hate it because, as we'll talk about, it can be pretty devastating to native species, but maybe not as devastating as we think. But still, it's a very common bird within its invasive range. We see it a lot, and whenever you're just seeing an invasive species a ton as a nature lover, you're kind of like, oh, fuck these guys, But anyway, maybe we'll all change our minds by the end of the episode. We'll see. Also, one last thing before I begin, let me give a shout out and endorsement to the book Starlings, The Curious Odyssey of the Most Hated Bird by Mike Stark. I do, for the show, I know I've talked about, how I get ready for episodes before, but basically, it's not like I'm just going on Wikipedia and reading you guys off the Wikipedia article. I'm reading scientific articles, combing through them. Always read the methods section, as I've learned. I usually do about 100 articles to prepare for each show. There were a lot of research out there for the Starling, along with consulting Sibley's Guide and all those kinds of resources. And finally, I try to read like one or two books to prepare for an episode. And this was one of them. This book was a great resource for researching this episode. It was just a great read in general. Mike Stark writes it like it's an engaging story. It really reads more like a historical fiction, except it's not fiction. It's historical fact. So I highly recommend it. By the way, I'm not getting paid to endorse that book by any means, and I don't do any ads. No, I lose money making this podcast, people. Anyway, let's go ahead and begin this episode in earnest. So first off, Starling. Where does that common name come from? The story behind this common name is a little unclear. The suffix ling is a diminutive suffix, basically meaning little, such as gosling meaning little goose. That first part, the star, may refer to a star, like, a star in the sky, and maybe starling means little star, since with the pointed wings and beak and tail of the starling, when it's flying, it sort of looks like a four-pointed star. The star may also just be an Old Germanic word. I found an Old Germanic word, stare, which seems to refer to birds in general, and maybe the starling in particular. So maybe starling just means little bird. There's also evidence that in English, the starling was largely referred to as stare, like back in the 1800s. I guess this was before the ling was added. And this is evidenced by William Butler Yeats' poem dating from the late 1800s. Like it's in the title of the poem is something about like a stare by the window, and he's referring to the starling as stare. The scientific name for the starling is Sturnus vulgaris. This is a really boring etymology name. Sturnus is just a Latin name for starling, and vulgaris is Latin for common, so it literally just means common starling. And so you'll hear this bird referred to as either common starling or European starling. To describe it, I think we all know what starlings look like, but I'll go ahead and describe it. It's a lean, robin-sized bird. It does have sort of a potbelly appearance when it's standing straight up, sort of like a little beer belly on these birds. They have black plumage that's speckled with white spots and stripes. It does have some iridescence to its feathers. You might see a little bit of like a green or a purplish shine on it, especially if its feathers are wet and the sun is shining. Its legs are long and lanky, and it's often seen strutting around lawns, pecking at lawns on those long, lanky legs. Its legs are red or pink in color. Its bill is long and slender. During the breeding season, the bill is yellow. However, during the non-breeding season, it becomes dark and begins to match the black body. Its eyes look pretty black from a distance, but if you look real close, you can actually see a colored iris. And this colored iris is used to differentiate males from females. Males have a dark brown iris, while females have a lighter brown or gray iris. And this bird is native to Eurasia and North Africa, so kind of just pretty much across like all of Europe, Russia, Northern Asia, and then it's got a tiny native distribution down in North Africa. However, it's been widely introduced throughout the world. It's on every continent except Antarctica. Those penguins are standing strong against the starling. I'll talk more about its invasion of different parts of the world later on in the episode. In their native range, they are a forest edge specialist and use adjoining grasslands for most of their foraging. However, a lot of human-modified landscapes mimic this habitat, and buildings and ornamental trees provide roosting areas for the starling. Lawns mimic grasslands for feeding. So that's part of the reason why it's been so successfully introduced to areas, because our anthropomorphic modifications to the landscape mimic its natural environment. The answer to whether European starlings are a migratory species is sort of a shoulder shrug. There are populations like in the Midwest and Southeast of North America that do migrate, but they overlap extensively with sedentary populations. In winter, starlings form large flocks that travel to food sources, and if the climate in an area becomes too harsh or the food supply dries up, they will move on to greener pastures. So they're just a very nomadic kind of bird. Like they might hang out in an area and they won't leave if times are good. But if they're not, they're more than willing to move off. And they don't just migrate north and south, they'll migrate east and west. Really, they don't have a set migration. They're not really cold adverse. They're fine. Remember, they're from Eurasia, from Europe, and Norway is part of their native range. So they're fine with some cold and some snow and some ice and everything. But it's really just food and breeding sites that they're looking for. And even if they don't perform a true migration, they will move around a lot during the winter, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles over a winter in search of food. These birds do have a lot of interesting vocalizations. Song is what females use to sexually select male partners. Laboratory and field experiments seem to show song as the only selection preference. They don't use plumage at all. It doesn't matter how big that beak is or how pink those legs are or how iridescent those feathers are. Really, it's song only that they're using to select. Because of this, there's a really strong evolutionary selection on the male starling song. Interestingly, there seems to be no territorial aspect to male singing. This is likely because, as we'll see, starlings kind of have a free love society with their breeding. They're very tolerant of others breeding close to them. So they don't sing to try to defend a territory. It's only to attract a mate. This is different from a lot of other song birds who sing both to attract a mate and to say, this is my territory, stay away. Males will sing a warbling song, which is used to attract a mate and maintain the pair bond. The male will often sing this nearby or directly from inside their nesting cavity. The male chooses the nesting cavity, too, by the way, which we'll talk about in the breeding section. So they'll sing from that nesting cavity to try to attract the female. The warbling song is a continuous song lasting about 30 seconds and made up of several motifs. Each motif is created through a mixture of improvisation, modification of known songs, and mimicry. That's right, starlings are mimics. I've personally heard starlings mimic robins, blue jays, and chickadees, but they're known to mimic a wide variety of bird songs. Yeah, I think I say this in my Robin episode, being out in the woods and hearing a really cool bird song. And I'm like, oh my God, this must be a rare species. And looking up and just, and be like, oh man, it's just a robin. That definitely happens with me with starlings too. I'll hear like this crazy cool, complicated bird song, like with some liquid elements. The starling especially, I feel like its song sometimes sounds like drops of water or like almost like a metallic sound. And I'm like, oh my God, must be some insane warbler that's migrating through. And then I look up and it's just a starling. And I'm like, fuck you, starling. They don't just mimic other bird species. They've been known to mimic frog calls. I read an article from January of 2025 in Fresno County, California, where a European starling was observed mimicking a Pacific chorus frog call. They also are known to imitate human whistles and instruments. Mozart actually had a pet starling that would sing back his compositions to him. There's speculation that many elements of his work, A Musical Joke, may have been co-composed by his pet starling. And Mozart obviously really loved this bird because he had a funeral procession for it when it died after being with him for 3 years. I wish they had included that in that Amadeus movie, the bird funeral. That would have been pretty cool. Starlings are known to imitate human speech. Here's a clip from Nature on the Go, LLC. I got it off of YouTube, of a pet starling mimicking human speech.
Central Park, New York City. Central Park, New York City. William Shakespeare. Central Park, New York City. European Starling. William Shakespeare, Shakespeare bird. European Starling. William Shakespeare, Shakespeare bird. Shakespeare bird. European Starling.
And starlings also imitate anthropomorphic sounds like sirens and car alarms. Male starlings are open-ended learners. We talked about birdsong on the show before and how most songbird species have a critical song learning period, usually during their nestling and juvenile stages. During this period, they acquire their ability to sing. I think it was the cardinal episode maybe that I kind of went into depth about this and talked about an experiment where male cardinals were raised in soundproof boxes. And then as adults, they were unable to sing, even when exposed to cardinal song, because they missed that critical window of development. Well, starlings, like song sparrows, to think of another mimic bird I've covered on the show, continue to learn new songs throughout their life. Also, starlings appear to have an innate song ability, possibly due to their ability to improvise. Even starlings raised in complete acoustic isolation are still able to produce songs with about 16 song motifs. Interestingly, starlings raised in acoustic isolation, except for a tape playing common nightingale songs, learned only 17 song motifs, so only one more than the ones that were just totally like earmuff silence. You'd think they would have learned a lot more than, those ones raised in total silence. But this shows the importance of having a teacher to model their songs off of and observe. When starlings are raised with a live tutor, they can sing songs with up to 37 motifs. Since starlings continue to learn songs throughout their life, a larger repertoire of motifs in a starling male's warbling song likely indicates age and experience. Experiments on whether more complex warbles are more attractive to starling females are mixed, though. Some experiments suggest that the more complicated songs, the ones with more motifs, are more attractive to females, while others find no correlation. Interestingly, North American starling males seem to have the biggest repertoires, followed by the European starlings. Australian starling males have the smallest repertoires. I'm really resisting making a dick joke here, comparing song repertoire size and the attractiveness to females. But anyway, we'll move on. Both sexes also engage in a whistle song, which is 1 to 2 note song used to communicate between starlings. Interestingly, the whistle song shows regional differences, suggesting there are different dialects between populations of starlings. This is so cool. Birds have accents. Individuals also have their own distinct whistle songs. Do these birds have a sense of identity, maybe, if they have, their identifying songs that they can sing? We learned in our Raven episode how ravens have a sense of self and can identify other specific individuals. And then in our magpie episode, we talked about how magpies can recognize themselves in a mirror. So, there's definitely some sense of identity in the bird world. And, when you look at starlings in those big flocks numbering hundreds of thousands, it's kind of easy to just think of them as, just a big wave of invasive birds, but each one of them might have its own little, identity. Like, I'm Frank, I'm Bob. Starlings also engage in a lot of chatter back and forth to each other, especially when they're roosting. This chattering is very quick, but when it's slowed down by a factor of 4, it becomes evident that there's a high level of structure to it. In fact, when performing statistical analysis of grammar motifs and syllables with starling speech, it begins to resemble the clicks of dolphins and even human speech. Rather than just squawking meaninglessly, starlings likely have some form of language and are communicating important information when they chatter. I talked about this in my Raven episode also, where these roosting birds seem to get together at the end of the day and talk about threats, food sources, and get ready for the breeding season. I won't be surprised at all in the next decade if we have a better grasp on avian language, probably with the help of AI. The Merlin bird app, I love using it. You hear a bird and you open up that bird app and it, tells you exactly what it is. I wonder if in 10 years there's going to be a Merlin bird app, but it's bird language and there'll be some blue jay squawking and you hold up the app and it turns out they're talking about you, saying your hair looks shitty or something. Starlings also use a lot of body language too. Since these birds forage in flocks, especially in winter, you can see them interacting with each other a lot, and they are really feisty. They seem to always be pecking at each other and squabbling, especially around feeders. They're just constantly getting in fights. And they're, fighting with other birds too, that are trying to come to eat, and the starlings are always picking fights with them. This is, part of the reason why people hate starlings is you're at your feeder, you're watching, the nice little red-bellied woodpecker take a peanut or something, and then the starlings just mob the feeder and kick him out, and they're just squabbling and fighting each other, and you're like, fuck starlings. Got your coffee, just taking a sip. Fuck starlings. The starlings also communicate with various body language signals like beating their wings, clacking their bills, raising the feathers on their body and head. If a bird is trying to show submission, it may crouch or bow. So they're very communicative and gregarious birds. So to go into their feeding, these are dietary generalists. They're able to adapt to a wide range of food sources. While they prefer to eat insects, they also readily eat seeds, grain, and fruits if those are the most available. They do have a variety of feeding strategies depending on what food is available, but their main one is called probing. In this strategy, they insert their bill into the ground and open it up, causing the dirt or leaves or whatever substrate is there to spread and reveal potentially hidden food items. Starlings have especially strong muscles to open their beak against the resistance of the ground. Starling nestlings are fed an almost entirely insect diet. In a study of nestling feedings in France, the most frequently fed insects were caterpillars, fly larvae, beetle grubs, and earthworms. European starlings are also known to prey on bird eggs. It seems like this is only with shorebird eggs, though. They've been known to prey on Arctic tern eggs, black knotty eggs, red-footed booby eggs, and roseate tern eggs. One food source starlings can't eat is fruit that contains high levels of sucrose, as they cannot break down this sugar. I talk a lot about sugar digestion by birds in my cedar waxwing episode, so check that out. But starlings will avoid fruits high in sucrose because it gives them terrible diarrhea and an upset tummy too. In fact, spraying fruit and crops with sucrose has been proposed as a measure to deter starlings from eating them. Starlings are very versatile breeders, and this is key to their success as an invasive species. Within their introduced range, they're known to nest in tree holes and man-made structures that create cavities like stoplights or signs, like really anything that they can get into. Also nest boxes, like bluebird nest boxes or woodpecker nest boxes they'll nest in. They'll also nest in rock crevices and sand burrows too. Within its natural range, though, it's strictly a tree cavity nester on forest edges. I read a study conducted on starling nestlings in Białowieża National Park in Poland. This park is considered the last primeval forest in Europe and likely represents the starling's pre-human environment. This study found starlings preferred nesting within 150 meters of the forest edge and were almost never found past 500 meters deep into the woodline. Starlings are unable to excavate their own cavities, so they're called like secondary cavity nesters. They rely on either naturally occurring tree holes or nesting cavities formed by other birds like woodpeckers. They seem to prefer holes that are as high up as possible. This is true for tree cavities and also in experiments with hung nest boxes. Starlings will preferentially nest in the highest nest boxes that are hung up. They have a narrow range of nest hole size that they will use. They won't use nest holes smaller than 3.5 centimeters. Presumably, this is just too small for them to enter comfortably. We'll talk later about how this information can be used to keep starlings from invading nesting boxes. They also won't use cavities with nesting holes greater than 5.5 centimeters. This size is too large and allows easy access for predators into the nest. They do not seem to really return to the same nesting site year after year, but instead try to find a new one each year. A study from North America found 32% of nesting females returned to the same nest box in subsequent years, while one out of the Netherlands found only 12% returned to the same nest box. They will defend their nest hole vigorously, with the male putting up most of the defense. However, outside their nesting hole, they are not very territorial and will tolerate other starlings and bird species nesting near them. In areas with a dense collection of nesting cavities like the eaves of a house or those big fluorescent signs on storefronts, starlings will become colonial nesters with lots of nests close together. However, within these nests, they are generally monogamous with one male and one female per nest. Unsurprisingly, though, with a bird this numerous and so widespread, there are plenty of exceptions to the rule. Extra pair paternity occurs fairly frequently, with both males and females sneaking off for a little bit of extra on the side. Males will occasionally engage in polygamy, siring nests with multiple females. One starling male in Antwerp, Belgium, was even found fathering 5 nests with 5 different females. These polygamous males do seem to have a primary nest that they provision more than their secondary nests. So like they have a main bitch and some side bitches. Polyandry also occurs too. This same study in Belgium found nests of females containing eggs sired by up to 3 males. Communal breeding occasionally occurs. That extensive Belgium starling breeding study that I've been referencing throughout this breeding section also found a case of 2 females sharing a nest box with 1 male and all raising young together. Starlings are just kind of like the free-love swinger birds. Except for in the far northern part of their range, starlings will attempt 2 broods. Occasionally, non-breeding juveniles from the first brood will help their parents raising their second brood. This is called cooperative breeding, and it's pretty rare in the bird world, although we've now seen it with 2 species we've covered in this show, the Hoatzin and the brown-headed nuthatch. Females also engage in intraspecific brood parasitism, sometimes laying an egg or 2 in the nest of another female starling to leave her with all the work of raising the young. The parasitizing bird may even eject one of the eggs from the nest to make room for her unwanted adoptee. Once a nesting hole has been chosen by a breeding pair or whatever breeding arrangement the starlings have come up with, the male seems to do most of the provision of nesting material. One interesting fact is that the male brings a lot of aromatic plants, such as yarrow, into the nesting hole. It's thought that these aromatic plants help to fumigate the nest hole and decrease parasites, fungus, and infections in the nestlings. Male starlings actually have seasonal variation in their olfactory bulbs, which grow large during the breeding season and then shrink during the non-breeding season. Experiments have shown that they are unable to detect the smell of yarrow outside of the breeding season, so they kind of just stop smelling during the whole winter. I mean, I do too, but it's because my nose is clogged with snot, not because my olfactory bulb regresses. Females lay 3 to 5 eggs. The eggs are blue or white. They kind of look like robin eggs. They lay 1 egg per day. Rarely they'll skip a day between egg laying, so usually they lay all their eggs within 3 to 4 days. They seem to lay their eggs in the morning, specifically between 6 and 12 o'clock, from a study of nest boxes in Brittany, France that I read. This study found, however, that starling moms would lay eggs in the afternoon instead of the morning if they were engaging in some brood parasitism. This is likely because in the afternoon, the starling moms of the other nest boxes are more likely to be off feeding and away from their nests in the afternoons. So they might save that egg for the afternoon if they know they're going to, sneak off to Miss Starling's nest box and lay an egg in it and force her to raise the young. Both male and female share incubation and nestling feeding duties, but the female does more of the nest chores than the male does. The eggs hatch after about 2 weeks. Chicks are born blind and naked. They rely on their parents for everything. Parents also remove the chicks' fecal sacs, basically bird diapers, from the nest for the first 6 to 7 days. But once the chicks get their first set of downy feathers and are better able to thermoregulate, the parents are just like, fuck it, just let them shit on themselves. And they stop removing the fecal sacs. The chicks take 3 weeks to fully fledge and leave the nest, but they continue to receive supplemental feedings from their parents for up to 2 weeks. Fledglings are really fat, like significantly bigger than their parents. It's crazy to see them at the feeders, like in the spring and summer, right after they fledge and have left the nest, because the parents are still feeding them, but they're like almost like twice the size as the parents, and they're so greedy and just like, give me food, and it's kind of crazy to see. So let's talk about a really interesting phenomenon with the European starlings, murmurations. Murmurations are a really cool phenomenon displayed by European starlings and also other members of the starling family, such as the black myna and the rosy starling. They are a form of collective animal behavior where large groups of animals can perform coordinated actions, such as the schooling of fish or herding of wildebeest. If you've never seen a murmuration, you've got to look it up. There's tons of videos. And honestly, as much as I hate starlings, I keep saying fuck starlings, I do like the murmurations. They sort of make it worth it that they're an invasive species. Murmurations usually occur in the evening just prior to the birds roosting for the night. European starling flocks during murmurations can number from a few hundreds up to 750,000 individuals. The birds will form a 3-dimensional cloud with each individual bird moving in a synchronized and cohesive manner. They form shapes such as spheres, planes, and waves. Interestingly, they usually remain over the same point of ground during this whole display. Like they aren't flying from one point to another doing these murmurations. They're really staying in one spot. A lot of research has gone into how the birds are able to perform these super synchronized maneuvers. They all seem to know what to do at once, even while flying really close together, and they never really crash into each other. Analysis of starling murmurations using computer models has helped shed insight into the mechanics behind this beautiful display. There is no lead bird that is directing all the others. Rather, tiny individual movements propagate through the entire group, causing major movements of the murmuration cloud as a whole. Each individual bird is affected by the movements of its neighbors and also affects them in turn. Each bird within a murmuration is paying attention to the movements of the 6 to 7 birds surrounding it and will react according to them, in turn causing the 6 to 7 birds around it to react, and this goes on and on, propagating through the whole group. Why starlings perform murmurations is poorly understood. The schooling of fish and herding of wildebeest and zebras is obviously an anti-predator technique, as it makes it hard for predators to pick out one individual to eat. However, European starlings perform murmurations in the absence of predators and ritualistically each night before roosting. It may be that during these twilight hours, they are more vulnerable to predators as their eyesight begins to fail, and so they ritualistically perform them each evening as a predator defense. But if this is true, why don't they perform the murmurations in the mornings also? A study of over 1,000 murmurations in the UK did find that murmurations tended to be larger and display more shape variability when a predator such as a harrier hawk was present. They also found that 30% of murmurations had some kind of avian predator present. However, it's difficult to determine cause and effect here. Are the murmurations a response to predators, or do the murmurations attract predators? I mean, that big, beautiful display that we like to watch is basically like a beacon, like, eat me, to a predator. Another theory is that murmurations are performed to help signal roosting sites to other starlings, a sort of safety in numbers defense to make it through the night, or maybe trying to attract more body heat to their roosting site. Murmurations do tend to last longer on colder nights, according to that UK study. The word murmuration supposedly comes from the sound of their wing beats of the thousands of starlings as they perform that flight display. However, I did read a paper that argued the word murmuration historically seems to refer to the chorus singing of groups of starlings when they're roosting, and not their flight pattern. But the word eventually got adopted to refer solely to their group flight performance. One final thought, and I may be anthropomorphizing here, but whatever. I feel like murmurations are almost a sort of dance and like a nighttime ritual for these starlings before they roost. We've talked about how they probably have a sense of individuality. They have a lot of vocalizations that are similar to dolphin and maybe even human speech. So these may be just very smart birds that have kind of a sense of culture even. And just before they go to bed, they like to do a little dance together. And maybe it's something that kind of helps build group cohesion before they go through that long night where there's going to be potential predators, where potentially they might die of cold. You know, it's kind of it's like the Titanic. They're, the orchestra's playing together as the ship goes down. They're kind of doing this last dance before who knows what's going to happen overnight. But that's obviously me projecting. All right, so let's talk about how they became one of the most invasive species in the world. The European Starling's introduction to North America is apocryphal and a well-known story. In 1890, Eugene Schieffelin released 80 breeding pairs in Central Park. Another 40 breeding pairs were released a year later in 1891. He was part of a group called the American Acclimatization Society that wanted to introduce various civilized plants and animals found in England and Europe to the barbarous New World. The story is that Eugene Schieffelin was trying to introduce all the birds featured in Shakespeare's works to the Americas. While Schieffelin was a theater enthusiast, there is no proof that this was his mission. Rather, it's sort of just a myth that's been used to make the story better and paint Schieffelin as a buffoon and a villain, which, I mean, he sort of is. But there were numerous other people releasing starlings in the U.S. also. Between 1872 and 1889, starlings were being released in Cincinnati, Quebec, Allegheny, Pennsylvania, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Portland, Oregon. Notably, none of those survived to establish breeding populations, but it does go to show you that even if Schieffelin had not released those Central Park starlings, someone would have eventually released a successful breeding pair. And in fact, the fateful release in 1890 wasn't Schieffelin's first time releasing starlings. Since the 1870s, multiple attempts had been made at releasing starlings by this American Acclimatization Society, and all failed. And at the time, popular opinion seemed to be behind Schieffelin and the American Acclimatization Society for their work introducing non-native species. It wasn't until starlings began causing problems, and with hindsight, people began to criticize them. In the years leading up to Schieffelin's fateful release, Forest and Stream magazine wrote that New York City was greatly indebted to the American Acclimatization Society for its release of starlings. But once large populations of starlings started roosting in American suburbs and cities, making loud noise and shitting everywhere, the European starling quickly became America's most hated bird. By 1942, European starlings had spread all the way across America and made it to California. Starlings seem to have had their peak in America in the 70s and 80s and may have numbered as high as 200 million, although it's estimated there's around 80 to 100 million now in North America. I'll talk about why their numbers have likely decreased in a second. A similar story happened in Australia with starling introduction. Between 1856 and 1881, 16 attempts were made to introduce breeding populations of starlings, with only 2 being successful. It appears it was farmers who led the way in introducing starlings, believing them to be important plant pollinators and pest control. 16 breeding pairs were introduced to South America in 1897 and successfully established a breeding population. Various Pacific islands and Caribbean islands also have had starlings introduced. The starling invasion of South America is more recent. In 1980, European starlings, likely escaped pets, were noted in Buenos Aires in Argentina. They remained confined to the city until 2004, when starlings began being spotted throughout Argentina. Like an unstoppable Mongol horde, they marched up through South America, and by 2022 could be found in Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Chile. The European starling invasion of Patagonia has caused particular concern for some of the already threatened native bird species there. Not surprisingly, studies of the genomes of these invasive starlings show significantly less genetic diversity than those within their native range. This is called the founder effect, where a few individuals that establish a population have their genetics disproportionately represented, and also from significant inbreeding early on in the establishment of the populations. Starlings have a great ability to adapt to various thermal environments, from cold northern climates like Alaska to hot tropical ones like Mexico. As I've mentioned throughout this episode, another one of the keys to the starling success in spreading throughout the world, and also why it's such a threat to native species, is how aggressive it is in usurping other birds from their nesting cavities. It will kick out birds as large as northern flickers and wood ducks from their nesting cavities. This is pretty crazy considering that the northern flicker is close to twice the starling size. Starlings will sometimes band up in gangs of 3 or 4 to drive out a nesting bird from its cavity until one of them can take it over. Also, the fact that the European starling has double broods means it can outbreed a lot of cavity nesting birds, especially woodpeckers that usually only have one brood. When they take over a nesting cavity, they will kick out any eggs or nestlings that they find in it. They may just bury nestlings alive under their own nesting material, too. It's totally brutal. There's been a lot of studies on how different nesting cavity birds respond to starlings. I won't go into super nitty-gritty detail. More aggressive species like red-headed woodpeckers seem to put up a really good defense against starlings, and from a study in Ohio, only suffered a 17% eviction rate compared to a 52% eviction rate for red-bellied woodpeckers. I was kind of surprised by this because red-bellied woodpeckers seem pretty aggressive to me, but I guess they're sort of just, chickens when it comes to the starlings. Native species do appear to be adapting to starlings. In experiments with starling decoys, many native bird species like northern flickers and acorn woodpeckers will attack them on sight when breeding. In fact, even first-time breeding northern flickers, who presumably have never personally had to deal with starlings, having to usurp their nests, responded aggressively to starling decoys, implying that even during their juvenile years they learned that starlings are competition. I mean, starlings are here to stay, and it seems that to other cavity nesting birds, at least they are seen the same as native species, and just another nest competitor for them to deal with. It's hard for us as birders and nature lovers, though, to see it like this, to accept starlings as, well, now you're just part of our environment. There's nothing quite as heartbreaking as witnessing a native bird species being evicted from its nest and its young killed by a non-native species. But at a population level, starlings don't appear to be majorly threatening any bird species. One exception to this, though, is sapsuckers. They actually do appear to be showing a decline in areas where they occur with starlings, which, is pretty much everywhere. And as for other bird species, starlings certainly aren't helping them, but competition for nesting cavities occurs between native species, too. Really, factors like climate change, clearing of forests that reduce breeding sites, and insect population collapse are the much more major threats for our native bird species than just the little old starling. And if you want to blame one invasive species, don't blame the starling. blame cats. I mean, I've talked on the show before. Cats are killing billions of birds in North America every year. Cats make starlings look like, cute little loud tourists just, touring North America. But cats are just freaking serial killers just cruising around, killing all the native birds. Starlings aren't just hated by birders. Farmers and pilots also despise them. European starlings are considered a pest species that consume crops, feed, and seeds on farms. This isn't trivial damage. In 2017, the U.S. Department of Agriculture placed the losses in the billions of dollars. Billions! Eliminate debt in the U.S. just by exterminating all the starlings, right? But countries do have a bad record when going at war with birds. I don't think we would win the war against the starlings. If Australia lost their battle against the emus, I think the starlings would kick our ass. Sorry. I'm patriotic, but man, we don't want to go to war with starlings. Single starlings can consume up to 2 pounds of grain in a month. And when you think that there's, around 100 million starlings in North America, that's a bunch of farmers' grain that these birds can eat. Ranchers really despise starlings because not only do they eat their animal feed, but they preferentially pick out the most nutritious food items, causing the livestock to fill up on the less nutritious bits that are left over. Presence of starlings on a ranch is associated with slower cattle growth and also lower milk output on dairy farms. Starlings are also an aviation hazard. The main hazard comes from when flocks and trees nearby airports get spooked by the planes and take off together, causing the plane to collide with hundreds or thousands of starlings. In 1960, a Lockheed Electra, a 4-engine prop plane, collided with a flock of starlings in Boston's Logan Airport during takeoff, causing 62 people to die. This is the worst airline disaster caused from bird collisions in the U.S. Modern airplane engines are better designed to deal with ingestions of birds. Ingestions is the industry term for when a bird gets sucked into a plane engine. That's kind of crazy. There's maybe some vor stuff there, but it just makes me think the plane is some kind of Lovecraftian horror, like ingesting the birds. Between 1990 and 2013, there were an estimated 3,200 Starling collisions with civilian or military aircraft, thankfully without any human fatalities. But I'm pretty sure the ingested starlings didn't do too well. Starlings are also known for nesting inside idle aircraft engines and in aircraft hangars, which definitely annoys pilots and maintenance crews alike. Finally, starlings can be a human health hazard through disease spread by their shit. Their shit is much less virulent than pigeon feces. Lab testing shows pigeons far and away have the grossest shit containing the most diseases, but starling shit does carry E. coli and salmonella. Starling shitting into animal feed is particularly dangerous for the animals, like cattle feeding on it are then at risk for potentially life-threatening salmonella and E. coli infections. Areas dense with starling droppings have the potential of harboring histoplasmosis, a fungus that humans can acquire by breathing in air that has the spores in it. Other bacteria transmitted through bird droppings like Mycobacterium avium, paratuberculosis, and Chlamydia psittaci have also been linked to starlings. Their droppings also cause corrosive damage to human structures, resulting in them having to be frequently cleaned or repaired. Starlings and pigeons are sort of neck and neck as the most economically destructive birds in the U.S. Invasive starlings also help spread invasive plants. The Russian olive is an invasive species that is particularly problematic in the western U.S., where it chokes out native plant species. The Russian olive is native to the exact native range of the starling, and starlings love eating it, causing them to spread their seed, and in a vicious cycle, both invasive species help spread each other. The history of humans' battle with starlings could be an entire episode on its own. By the early 1900s, starling populations were large enough in the eastern U.S. to cause huge roosting flocks in American cities and suburbs that created public outcry. The initial response was sort of a vigilante group, men going out and shooting the birds with guns or fire hoses to scare them away. But as we've learned in this episode, starlings are pretty smart, and they quickly learn to either adapt or ignore minor threats. As people became more desperate to get rid of the birds, wild solutions were attempted, such as draping trees and buildings with live electrical wires, itching powder, dirty laundry, and oil. Some enterprising charlatans even made money traveling town to town, promising to get rid of the starlings with some absurd scheme, only to skip town with the townspeople's money, and the starling's still there. Sort of like, a Music Man, except with starlings. In more modern times, various culling methods from traps to poisons to falconry are used on starlings. Also, deterrents like noise deterrents, predator decoys, and hostile architecture help to try to prevent them. Again, I'm not going to dive super into these various techniques, but just know at the end of the day, it might help to drive the starlings off in the short term, but all you're really doing is just moving them somewhere else so that they can be someone else's problem. The most effective measures come in trying to protect the breeding nesting cavities for native birds. You'll sometimes see nest boxes fitted with wire or tubing over the opening hole in order to make it smaller than 3.5 centimeters or 1.5 inches. This prevents starlings from entering, but allows smaller birds like bluebirds, titmice, and chickadees to enter. And starlings are pretty hard to outwit. Reminds me of like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote with people and starlings. There's been experiments using fake predator models such as snakes in nest boxes and also spraying nest boxes with scent of starling predators like rats, mice, or foxes. But the starlings quickly realize that this is man-made and not a real predator, and they'll nest with the fake snake in there anyway. I do want to end this starling invasion portion with one thing. It's not the starlings' fault, and their spread and success taking over native environments is made possible by one thing: us humans. We're the ones who intentionally brought them to these places, either to release like Schiefelin or as pets that were then released. We're the ones that provide easy food sources like grain and crops for them. We provide easy nesting areas with man-made structures. And finally, we facilitate their spread across continents by destroying natural barriers, such as large forests, grasslands, and deserts, and replacing them with cities and suburbs that mimic their natural forest edge habitat. So don't be mad at the starlings, be mad at you. There's no great estimation on how many European starlings there are worldwide. The Northern American population is thought to represent about a third of the worldwide population, so 100 million times 3, I can do that math. So maybe 300 million worldwide. But I've seen estimates as high as 1 billion birds worldwide. In Northern and Western Europe, populations of starlings are actually decreasing. This is due to a decrease in pasture land, less old trees that contain nesting cavities, and decreased use of human construction material that provides nesting sites for starlings, such as roof tiles for homes. In Sweden, since 1975, starling populations have decreased by 50%. And this is also likely why starling numbers have decreased in North America after their initial population expansion and explosion. Another factor for their decrease in population is changes in livestock practices. Outdoor grazing of livestock requires open pasture land, and also livestock stirs up the ground to scare up bugs, providing food sources to starlings. As more livestock rearing goes indoor, it removes this food source for starlings. In the southern hemisphere, in South Africa, South America, and Australia, starlings are still conquering new territory and their numbers are growing. Starlings do have a pretty short lifespan. In the wild, they only live an average of 2 to 3 years. They sort of have the pigeon strategy: live fast and die young and have a lot of offspring. They can live longer in the wild. The oldest known North American starling was 15 years, 3 months old when it was found dead in Tennessee after having been banded as a nestling. In captivity, starlings can live even longer than that. I've seen records of them living into their early 20s in captivity. Starlings' main predators are the avian predators like hawks, falcons, and owls. Nests are prone to predation by mammalian predators like rats, mice, raccoons, and squirrels. European starlings are prone to all the usual bird diseases that we've talked about on the show. Starlings can get bacterial conjunctivitis or pink eye. This is a fairly common condition in birds. However, swabs from a starling with conjunctivitis caught in Connecticut in 1994 grew a novel bacteria that was named Mycoplasma sterni, related to but different from Mycoplasma gallisepticum that usually infects birds. This Mycoplasma sterni has also popped up in mockingbirds in Connecticut and barn swallows in Germany, suggesting it's capable of being spread from starlings to other bird species. In Argentina, starling nestlings were found to have high infestations of botflies. These are nasty. It's a fly who lays their larvae in the skin of animals, and then the larvae hatch out like some kind of like alien movie. In fact, starlings seemed more prone to botfly infections than native Argentinian bird species. This may hint at a limiting factor for starlings' invasions of South America and other areas too if they have less immunity or defense against native parasites and diseases. All right, y'all. We're going to talk about the evolutionary history of starlings and then wrap up the episode. Kind of a long episode. It's nice sitting in a nice warm studio recording instead of shivering my butt off in the woods or sweating my butt off in the woods, depending on the time of year. Usually I'm getting bit by some mosquitoes too. Hell, sometimes I'm falling down a mountainside or it starts raining on me or a bear sneaks up on me. All these have happened while I've been recording before. But let's wrap up with the evolutionary history. European starlings belong to the family Sternidae. It's a highly successful family with 128 species. Interestingly, starlings are a bird of the Old World only. They have never made it naturally to the Americas. This is incredible because they did make it to some isolated Pacific islands, including Hawaii, but they never established in America. There's no doubt they physically could make it there. I mean, hell, in our last episode, we talked about how Houtons fucking floated to the Americas on rafts. So you can't tell me a starling couldn't fly across the Bering Strait. But when they got to the Americas, they must have not been any ecological niche for them to assert themselves in. It was already filled up with other birds. You may think starlings are related to corvids, the crow family, because they have similar legs good for strutting around. They hang out in roosts and trees, chattering to each other, and they are intelligent. However, the starling family is actually part of a clade of birds that evolved relatively early in the passerine or perching bird evolution. This clade contains chats, mockingbirds, thrushes, flycatchers, and starlings, and is termed Muscica poideae. The clade likely first evolved in Asia and then really began to diversify in Eurasia, which during the Miocene around 22 to 24 million years ago was wet and heavily forested. The mimids, the family that contains mockingbirds, thrashers, and catbird, actually appear to be sister species with the starling and also birds called oxpeckers. Oxpeckers are large birds that specialize in feeding off ectoparasites of African megafauna like elephants and rhinos. They literally just perch on their back and, pick parasites off of them. The oxpeckers appear to have formed around 22 million years ago, showing their ancestor species had made it out of Eurasia and started to specialize on feeding off of proto-elephants and rhinos of Africa by then. This is also when starlings began to separate from the mimids. There's an alternative scenario for the oxpeckers. It could be the family was more widespread 22 million years ago and had adapted to specialize to megafauna roaming Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Africa. However, when most megafauna outside of Africa went extinct by the late Pleistocene, the oxpeckers associated with them did too, and only the oxpeckers of Africa were left. The first major diversification within the starling family came with a really interesting close relative to the starlings called the rhabdornis birds, also called Philippine creepers. These three species of thrush-like birds are found only in the Philippines and are closely enough related that some place them within the family Sternidae. It's estimated they separated from the rest of the starling tribe around 19 million years ago, according to one Zoom tree of life. Likely this is when their ancestor species colonized the Philippines. The second lineage contains arboreal and fruit-eating starling species found in the Australasia region. These appear to have speciated within the past 10 million years. Finally, the last major lineage is pretty much a catch-all that contains all the other starling species scattered throughout Asia, Europe, and Africa. The genetic data of these major lineages is supported by the biodiversity of the Sternidae family. When you look at the species, the highest density of species occur in sub-Saharan Africa and Australasia. Within that third catch-all lineage of starlings is a clade called the Eurasian starlings, who are nearly all disturbed habitat specialists, suggesting their common ancestor was one too. Disturbed habitat specialists prefer areas that either are continuously being grazed or trampled by megafauna, or recently struck by some type of ecological disaster like fire or flooding. All 26 of the Eurasian starling clade are also migratory or semi-migratory, form flocks, and engage in some form of communal nesting. The Eurasian starlings are fairly recent, likely forming within the past 5 to 6 million years ago, as climate across Europe and northern Eurasia became more arid, favoring more segmented forests, grasslands, and disturbed habitat. And this is around when the European and common starlings formed. The European starling's closest relative is the spotless starling. Literally, it looks just like the European starling, except without those white spots. Spotless. It's in the same genus as the European starling, Sturnus, but has a restricted range around the Iberian Peninsula. The spotless starling separated from the European starling as recently as 250,000 years ago, likely during a period of glaciation that confined a subspecies of the European starling to Iberia and caused it to differentiate enough to become its own species. There are 12 recognized subspecies of European starling, with at least 3 of these being island populations. And there's also some differences between introduced starling populations. Australian starlings, maybe because they have to adapt to diverse climatic conditions across the Australian continent, show more genetic diversity compared to the invasive populations of the Americas and South Africa. In fact, the various populations, especially those on the leading edge of colonization over Western Australia, show high levels of mitochondrial diversity and ecological specialization, and low levels of interpopulation breeding, suggesting that they may quickly be forming a new subspecies. Like, starlings in Australia, I don't want to breed with those Bendigo starlings. They're a bunch of dingbats. Spike, who's Scottish, is definitely giving me some looks on my accent. Hybrids of European starlings and the closely related spotless starling have been found in France. These occurred in mixed breeding colonies where many European and spotless starlings were already breeding in close proximity, and I guess some of them got a little mixed up on which species to be with. It was unclear whether their offspring were sterile or not. Well, guys, that's what I got on the European starling, and I got to say the verdict is I do see these birds in a new light. I'm not warm and fuzzy towards them yet, you know. I still am going to mutter a little, fuck you, starling, but I think it'll be maybe it'll be like more like, fuck you, starling, you know. There's definitely a lot to appreciate about them. I'm going to kind of listen to their vocalizations more, look at their behavior a little more. But I still am a little upset at them, for sure. It's like a child that's disappointed you or something. But anyway, guys, thanks for listening. You know, write in. I'm happy to send you stickers, you know, maybe even throw in a free t-shirt or so here and there. And as always, stay dirty, fellow birdies.
Dirty Bird Podcast is brought to you by me, John, with my rotating panel of guests and co-hosts. Thanks for being on the show, everybody. The Dirty Bird theme song is by Ricky Pistone. Check out his groovy and hilarious music videos on YouTube. The outro music you're listening to right now is a song New York Redneck by the Sidewalk Slammers. Check them out wherever you get your music. The Dirty Bird Podcast logo is by the very talented TJ Ranoski. And of course, a shout out to my beautiful wife, Lauren, who created my original logo. Check out the show notes for this episode for a full list of credits for any bird calls or sounds used in the episode. Thanks for listening.
At the track, drive into Brooklyn, ain't never coming back. Tim's on the ground in the concrete jungle. I might get into a little rumble. Ain't